The summer of 1814 came Caldwell Park, the way ruin always comes. Quietly, in letters bearing the seal of banks and solicitors, slipped beneath the study door before breakfast, so no one in the house had to watch Lord Ashfield's hands shake as he read them. His daughter knew anyway. Daughters always know. Minerva Ashfield had learned to read the signs before she could name them. The way her father's laughter had grown thinner over the years, stretched over something hollow. The way cook began making broth where there had once been roast. The way her younger sister, Philippa. No, not that name, that one was taken. The way her younger sister, Constance, danced through every room of the house as though the Persian rugs beneath her feet would be there forever, because no one had seen fit to tell her otherwise. Minerva had turned 26 that spring. She was not beautiful in the way that made men stumble. She had good eyes, serious, grey, the kind that saw things clearly and gave nothing back. She had her mother's hands, long and steady. She had a mind that her father had once called remarkable, in the same tone another man might have used to describe an inconvenient weather pattern. Her sister Constance had blue eyes, a laugh like water over stones, and the particular gift of entering a room and making every person in it feel slightly better about being alive. Constance was 22. Constance had never once sat in the stillness after supper, listening to their father pace the study and count what remained. The letter that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday. Lord Ashfield read it twice at the breakfast table, which he never did. Then he folded it, set it beside his untouched toast, and said, quite carefully, that they would be expecting a visitor. Minerva looked at him over her teacup. His name, her father said, was Lord Gideon Farleigh, Earl of Thornmere. He was 31, unmarried, and in possession of a large estate in Northumberland that required. Lord Ashfield cleared his throat, considerable management. He had written to inquire, through his man of business, whether the Ashfield family would receive him. For what purpose? Constance asked brightly, helping herself to the last of the jam. Their father looked at Minerva, and Minerva understood. She said nothing. She drank her tea. She watched a small bird land on the garden wall outside, and then fly away again, and she thought, so this is how it arrives. Not dramatically, not with speeches. Just a letter beside cold toast on a Tuesday in June. Lord Farleigh was set to arrive on Thursday afternoon. He sent no portrait, no particular description beyond what his solicitor had conveyed, that he was a man of practicality, that he was seeking an arrangement of mutual benefit, and that he understood the nature of such transactions with full clarity. That last phrase, mutual benefit, lodged itself in Minerva's mind and stayed there. It was the language of contracts, of livestock sales. She could not decide if she resented him for it or respected him. She was still deciding on Thursday morning when the carriage was heard at the drive, except it was not the Earl's carriage. It was a hired cart, the kind farm labourers used, and the man who climbed down from it wore a coat so thoroughly plain and dusty that Minerva, watching from the upper hall window, assumed he was a delivery of some kind. He was tall. She noticed that, despite herself, with the kind of unguarded movement that comes either from very high confidence or from having no particular opinion of one's own appearance. He carried no luggage. He spoke briefly to the groom, then he walked around toward the kitchen entrance. Minerva frowned. She was still frowning when she descended the staircase and heard voices in the back corridor. Her father's, and the voice of someone she did not recognize, speaking in low, unhurried tones that carried an odd quality of authority. The voice of a man accustomed to being listened to, she thought, even when he was not trying. She pushed open the corridor door. The man standing there was not a delivery. He had a face that was not handsome in the obvious sense, not the kind that prompted sighs in ballrooms, but the kind that stayed with you. Sharp angles, a mouth set with restraint, eyes that were either grey or green depending on the light, and currently focused entirely on her. Her father made a small, startled gesture. Minerva. That is, I wasn't expecting. James Crawford, the man said. He extended a hand in the manner of a tradesman. Your father's been kind enough to show me the east wing. I'm assessing the stonework. Minerva looked at the hand. She shook it. It was not the hand of a man who had ever assessed stonework in his life. I see, she said. She did not see, but she was experienced enough in the art of not showing that to let it rest there. He spent the afternoon in the house. She heard him occasionally. His footsteps in the east passage, a brief exchange with the housekeeper about the state of the window frames. And once she turned a corner and found him standing in the library with one of her father's maps unrolled on the reading table, studying it with the focused stillness of a man reading a language he already knew. He looked up when she entered. Crawford, she said, not unkindly, simply naming him. Miss Ashfield. The stonework in the east wing, she said, setting down the book she'd come for. How does it fare? A pause, almost undetectable. Worse than it looks from outside. That is usually the way with old things. He looked at her for a moment, longer than strictly necessary. Yes, he said, it is. She took her book and left. That evening, from the small sitting room off the main corridor, she heard him talking with her father. The door was imperfectly latched. She had not intended to listen. She was returning from the Carson, the garden with a cutting she had taken from the lavender border, and she stopped, not out of intention, but because her own name reached her before she could move away. Her father said something she couldn't catch, and then Crawford, if that was his name, which she increasingly doubted, said, the quieter one. The elder daughter. She's the one I'd want to know more of. Silence. I noticed her this morning, he continued, and his voice had changed slightly, lost some of its performance. The way she looked at that cart and then looked away without remarking on it. She knew something was wrong with the arrangement, and she chose not to say so. That's not shyness. That's restraint. Her father said, very quietly, Minerva has always been. Yes, she is steady. I don't need steady, said the man who was not Crawford. I need honest. I need someone who will look at an account book and tell me plainly what she sees, not what she thinks I want to hear. A pause. I've had enough of the other kind. Minerva stood in the corridor with lavender in her hand and her heartbeat doing something she didn't entirely approve of. She went upstairs. She sat in her room, she thought. I should be angry. She was not entirely sure she was angry. On Friday morning, the man who had arrived as a stonework assessor was introduced at the breakfast table with somewhat overdone casualness by her father as Lord Gideon Farleigh, Earl of Thornmere, who had wished to see the estate in an informal manner before making any formal call. Constance looked at him with frank delight. You were the man with the cart. I was, said Lord Farleigh. That's very devious, Constance said approvingly. He didn't look at Constance, he looked at Minerva. Minerva poured tea, she said. Did the stonework assessment yield anything of use to you, my lord? He accepted the cup. More than I expected. She met his eyes briefly. He had the good grace not to look away. Her father had planned a formal meeting in the parlour after breakfast, the kind of stilted, airless encounter that these things usually required, with both parties performing some version of themselves that bore little relation to whoever they actually were. Minerva had prepared for it the way one prepared for minor surgery. She had worn a sensible dress. She had decided in advance that she would be pleasant and factual, and give him no cause for complaint. She had not prepared for him to fall into step beside her as she crossed the garden after breakfast, as though they had agreed to walk together when they had agreed to nothing of the kind, when they had agreed to nothing of said. I owe you an explanation, he said. You owe me nothing, my lord. You came to observe the property. That seems reasonable enough. I came to observe, he said, because I've been through this process 3 times in the past 4 years, and each time the woman presented to me had decided in advance who I was, and was performing for that person before I'd said a word. I couldn't. He stopped, started again. I wanted to see what was actually here. And what did you find? A long pause. The gravel crunched under their feet. A bee made its way along the lavender border. Her lavender, the same one she'd cut from last night. Fewer pretensions than I expected, he said. More dry wit. A woman who knows her father's circumstances well enough to have her opinions ready, but chooses her moments to voice them. He glanced at her. I found that the east wing really does need stonework incidentally. I know, Minerva said. It has needed it for 11 years. My father has been hoping it might resolve itself. Lord Farleigh almost smiled. She noticed he did it reluctantly, as though smiling cost him something. This is not a romantic situation, he said. I think you know that. My estate has debts. Your family has debts. There is a trust left to you by your grandmother that cannot be touched until you marry, and that trust would, in plain terms, allow me to stabilize Thornmere. And what would I receive? Minerva asked carefully, beyond the settlement of my father's accounts. He stopped walking. He turned to look at her. A household to manage, resources to manage it with. A husband who will not tend feelings he doesn't have, and who will not expect you to pretend either. He held her gaze. And the understanding that I will not make your life smaller than it already is. It was not a love declaration. It was not supposed to be, and yet Minerva thought. There are people who have been given love declarations and received far less than that. I will consider it, she said. She considered it for 2 days. She walked the estate. She sat in the library and looked at the account books her father had stopped looking at 2 years ago. She wrote a list, very quietly, very privately, in the back of an old household ledger, of what she was being asked to give up and what she was being asked to receive. She did not write Constance's face across the breakfast table, growing slowly less bright as the years passed, and the house grew colder, and the questions about when they would go to London grew more infrequent. She did not write her father's hands shaking over letters. She did not write the word alone, because she was not the kind of woman who wrote that word, not even to herself. She wrote, a husband who does not pretend. And she stared at that for a long time. Thornmere was 14 hours north by carriage. She had never been to Northumberland. She had heard it was cold and beautiful and uncompromising, which she supposed described her well enough too. She sent a note. It said, I accept your terms, with the amendment that I am also to have full oversight of the household accounts from the day of our arrival, and that we will speak plainly to one another as a matter of principle, not merely of convenience. If these terms suit you, Lord Farleigh, I believe we may come to an arrangement. His reply arrived the same evening. It said, Your amendments are accepted. I look forward to speaking plainly. There was nothing romantic about it. She read it twice. The wedding was small. Her father, Constance, the local vicar, and a handful of people she had known all her life and would not see for some time. Constance cried. Her father held her hand for a moment in the entrance to the church and said, very quietly, You are the best of us, Minerva. I am sorry it fell to you, she said. It didn't fall to me, father. I chose it, which was true. She held on to that. Thornmere, when she finally saw it, stopped her. She had expected something grey and bleak and magnificent in a punishing sort of way. It was grey, yes, northern grey, the grey of stone that has stood for centuries and intends to stand for several more. But the hills behind it were extraordinary. The light on them at 4 in the afternoon was a colour she had no name for, and the house itself, for all its debts and its failing east wing and its ledgers, full of difficult numbers, had the feeling of a place that had once been deeply, attentively loved. Lord Farleigh showed her the estate. He explained each portion with the directness she had come to recognize from him. What worked, what didn't, what he had tried, what had failed. He spoke about it, the way a surgeon speaks about a difficult case. Without sentiment, but not without care. She listened. She asked questions. She noticed that he listened to her questions in a way that men rarely did, without the particular quality of waiting for her to finish. It was not a marriage, yet it was an alliance. She understood that and had not asked for more, but there were moments, small, ungovernable moments that accumulated before she could stop them. The morning, 3 weeks in, when she found him already at the account books at 7 o'clock, and he said, "Without looking up, I couldn't sleep. I think the problem with the North tenancies is here. Line 42. Tell me if I'm wrong." And she sat down beside him and looked, and he was wrong about line 42, but right about the underlying principle. And they worked through it together for 2 hours before either of them thought to eat breakfast. The afternoons she walked out to the eastern field because a tenant had sent word about a wall collapse and found him already there, in a coat he wouldn't wear, in company helping to clear the rubble with 3 of the farmhands. He saw her arrive. He said nothing, just tilted his head in a way that meant, "What do you think?" She looked at the wall, she said. "Rebuild from the 3rd course, not the 4th. The 4th course stones are cracked. I noticed it when we walked this way last week." He looked at the stones. He said, "You're right." He said that without embarrassment, without the small qualification men usually added, "You're right." Full stop. She hadn't known, until that moment, how much she had wanted to hear it. There were harder moments too. A letter arrived from her father 3 months in. Not a letter, really. More of a series of increasing anxieties, formatted as sentences, including a passage about Constance and a young man from Derbyshire, who had some money and some charm and was pursuing her rather openly, and whether Minerva could possibly come for a short visit, because her father wasn't at all sure, and could she read the letter? She put it down. She stood in the corridor of Thornmere, with her hand flat against the stone wall, feeling its solidity, thinking about what she had left and what she had come to, and wondering when exactly that accounting had changed. Lord Farleigh found her there. He didn't ask immediately. He waited. He had that quality, she had learned, of knowing when to wait, and then he said, "Your father?" "My sister," she said. "And yes, my father. Do you need to go to them?" She looked at him. In the month since the wedding she had learned his face better than she had expected. The way it looked when he was working through a problem. The way it looked when he was tired. The way it looked now, which was something she didn't have a precise word for yet, but which was not indifferent. "I think," she said slowly, "that my father has always needed someone to do the worrying for him, and I have always been the person who did it. But, he said, "I am not certain," she said, "that I am required to go on being that person for the rest of my life." He was quiet for a moment. "That is not a small thing to say." "No," she agreed, "it isn't. Would you like to write to them? I'll have the letter sent today. You can tell your father what you think about the young man from Derbyshire, if you think your opinion would be useful, and you can tell your sister, whatever you would tell her, and if after that you still feel you should go, we'll go. We'll go." She looked at him. "You would come. Thornmere won't fall apart in a fortnight." A pause. "And I wouldn't send you alone." It was not a declaration. She had stopped expecting declarations. But she lay awake that night longer than usual, looking at the ceiling of a house that had started to feel like hers, thinking about the particular texture of, "We'll go," and "I wouldn't send you alone," thinking about what those phrases had cost him, whether they had cost him anything, whether she was the kind of woman who needed to be sure before she let herself. She stopped that train of thought. She took it up again at 4 in the morning. By November, she had reorganized the household accounts entirely, had found 17 errors in the estate ledgers dating back 9 years, had hired a new housekeeper, and negotiated a better contract with the main supplier of timber for repairs, and had begun to understand, with a certainty that had crept up on her so quietly she hadn't noticed it arriving, that she did not want to be anywhere else. Constance came to visit in December. She arrived in a state of high spirits and managed, within 24 hours, to rearrange the drawing-room furniture, form a strong opinion about the best walking route in the valley, and develop what she described as a deep personal connection with Lord Farleigh's elderly wolfhound. She also, at some point during her 3rd evening there, found Minerva alone in the kitchen garden, where Minerva sometimes went at night when the house was full of noise, and she needed to think. "Well," Constance said, appearing at the garden gate with a candle and no coat on, which was exactly like her. "You look different." "It's November. I look cold." "You look like yourself," Constance said. "You look like the version of yourself you were before you started looking after all of us." Minerva was quiet. "Is he good to you?" "He is honest with me," Minerva said. "Which is, yes, Constance, he is good to me." Constance hugged her briefly, fiercely the way she had when they were children. Then she went back inside, still without a coat, because she was Constance. Minerva stayed in the garden a little longer. When she came inside, Lord Farleigh was in the corridor. He had not been waiting. He happened to be there, returning from the library with a book he'd gone to find. He looked at her face. "Cold," he said. "Thinking," she said. "About?" She looked at him for a moment in the low light of the corridor, at the face she had been learning for months. The angles of it, the restraint of it, the thing behind the restraint that she had not named yet because she had been waiting to be sure. "About," she said carefully, "whether I had made a better decision than I knew at the time." He was still for a moment, the kind of still that meant something. "And," he said, "I think," Minerva said, "that I did." It was not a declaration either. They were not either of them people who made declarations easily, but something shifted in his face, not breaking open, nothing so sudden, just a small, definitive change, like a door that had been almost closed, swinging open another inch. "Minerva," he said. It was the first time he had used her name, not Miss Ashfield, not my lady, her name, plain and precise. "Gideon," she said. They stood in the corridor of Thornmere, with the December cold coming through the stones, and neither of them said anything else for a moment. Because sometimes the naming of a thing is enough to begin it. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair back from her face, the kind of gesture that is nothing and everything, that costs very little and means quite a lot. And she thought, this was not what I expected. This is better than what I expected. Winter settled over the estate, the accounts balanced for the first time in a decade. A tenant in the North Valley told anyone who would listen that the new countess had looked at the drainage problem behind his barn and diagnosed it in about 4 minutes, which he considered extraordinary. The wolfhound slept at the foot of their bed, which Gideon pretended to find annoying. The east wing was repaired that spring. Minerva oversaw it. She stood in the courtyard when the last scaffold came down and looked at the stone. Solid now, pointed properly, standing the way it had always wanted to stand, given the chance. Gideon came to stand beside her. "Well," he said. "Well," she agreed. He took her hand, not with ceremony, not with speeches, the way you take the hand of someone you have gotten used to and intend to keep getting used to, which is, in the end, what love mostly looks like when it is the lasting kind. The hills behind Thornmere caught the late afternoon light, that colour she had never been able to name. She supposed she had time to find the word for it. She was not going anywhere.